All right. Today's plan is we're going to work through chapter 7 in our book on type in Photoshop. I'm going to share that with you, and I'm going to share a couple of other ways to embellish type. And then I'm going to give you something that you can do in class and be done with so that you don't have any homework for the rest of fall break. And you can go and enjoy yourself. So, this is going to be a book file. Yep.
That means you're going to do the rest of my homework?
Well, yeah. I'm just the nice teacher who's saying you can get done today and not have any. All right. In Photoshop, we're going to do File Open, and we're going to navigate to our book files, Chapter 7. Let's see. Lesson 6. Lessons. Oops, that's Illustrator. That's not quite what I want. Desktop. Photoshop book files, lesson 7. We're going to go with the 07 start file. And it's going to look familiar. This one is the one that we worked on last week, doing the puppet warp and doing some masking around her hair. So, type in Photoshop. The first time we start using type in Photoshop, it's vector-based, meaning that when we're still within this document, as we rescale, it's able to change and not lose any detail or quality. But the minute that we accept it, it turns into raster type, meaning it's just made up of a bunch of pixels. Pixels that are lit up. All right. So Photoshop is going to preserve that vector-based type outlines, and it's going to use them to rescale a PDF if you have it, or if you end up saving as an EPS file, which is not real likely in Photoshop. EPS is the generic version. It's called encapsulated PostScript. It's usually what we see in Illustrator. It's based on vectors. Our Illustrator files end in .ai, which means they're native to Illustrator, but you can also save them as .eps, which is just a generic vector font that other programs can open. It's the generic version. So Illustrator can do that, or I'm sorry, Photoshop can do that if you save it to a PDF, an EPS file, or if you print to a PostScript printer, which this gem is not. The new one that we're getting in a couple weeks is capable of understanding PostScript. Yes, we're getting a new printer. It's happening finally. Hallelujah.
Your recording is not working.
Recording or screen share?
Screen share. It's just on one still image.
Oh. That's all I've... Oh,
mouse
that.
Works, but that's all that's there.
All right, let's... Okay. This button, show. Okay, did it go away?
Yeah.
Okay, now let's try it again. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that. All right, our start file. We have this open. Let's do a file, save as, and call it your name and then type. Then what we're going to do is go up into our window drop-down menu and choose workspace. And instead of working in Essentials, we're going to switch to Graphic and Web. And all this is going to do is change what windows are open, assuming that based on the job that you chose or the workspace that you chose, this is what you're probably going to want to use most often. So what this did was add our character panel and our paragraph panel up here at the top. Again, you didn't have to do that. You can always go and activate any panel you want by going into the window drop-down and putting check marks in front of them. So we now have the character panel active. All right. Making a clipping mask from type. We kind of did this a couple of weeks ago where we typed out, I think, the word trees And then we use that background of took the minivan and we put it on a grass background. You guys remember doing that? We put those trees in the words type. We're going to practice that again. So a clipping mask is an object or a group of objects that their shape masks the artwork so that only whatever's inside of that shape or those letter forms is what shows through. Before we do this, we're going to add some guides that we can use to position our type. So make sure that your whole image is fitting on the screen. So do a fit to screen if you need to. If your rulers are not showing, turn your rulers on. Command R is the shortcut for that. If you forget that shortcut, go under the View menu and you'll see Rulers about halfway down, and a check mark shows your rulers. And we're going to go from our left ruler on the side and we're going to drag out a guideline at about the midpoint, or 4.25. So if you can see your rulers, 4 1/4 is where we're going to drag our first guideline. And we're going to add type now. Let's click on our type tool. And there's a couple things you should know. I'm just going to show you so you don't have to do this, but if you simply click, your insertion point, goes down. I obviously have very big type. I have 200 point type over here in Zapfino. Let me just change this so you can see what's going on. Let's do anything but that. How about Tahoma? 36. So lorem ipsum is the filler type that shows up. Notice that where I clicked is exactly where the cursor came in, and because I have left align clicked here, wherever I clicked, my type is anchored there and it starts going to the right. This is called point type. So wherever you click, it starts filling, but the problem with it is it doesn't know wrapping boundaries. So you can see it just keeps going right off the side. So this is good for when you're doing maybe headlines or just 1 or 2 words. That's how you would add that. I'm just going to dump these quick. And then the other way you can do type is clicking and dragging out a box. Now whatever you type will stay within that box and it will wrap. Okay, so clicking once is an insertion point, that's point type. Clicking and dragging a box allows you to put some boundaries with it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our type tool, and before we start working with it, we're going to go up to our option bar and we're going to tell it how we want it to behave before we click. So in your font choices up here in the option bar, we're going to use a serif typeface, and serif typefaces have the little feet on them. If you don't know that, when you click in this down box, there's a filter and we see all classes. If we choose the all classes drop down box and just say, show me the serif type that I have on this computer, it's going to show us our options that are loaded on this particular computer. So I'm going to go with, I hate Times New Roman, so I'm not going to do that. But do you guys all have Georgia? I assume. Pick one, doesn't really matter. From the options of how it can be stylized, if this typeface has other versions that were created by the type maker, not just fake versions that Photoshop is doing by tilting it or adding more pixels to make it bold, these are the real versions that ship with it. So there's italic, bold, and bold italic. All right. Then in the size, we're going to make this quite big. We're going to go 144 points. And we're going to center it, meaning wherever we click, our type is going to go to the left and the right equally. Also, more things that we want to do that aren't available up in the option bar, we're going to go over to the character panel that we have on the right-hand side, and we see all of these choices should be made here, except I see my 144 didn't stick. So I'll do it over here also. Another thing that we're going to change in here is our tracking. Right after the size of the type, if we go to the right, the next option is the leading. That's how much space is between lines. If we had multiple lines of type, that's set at auto by default. We're going to leave that there. If we go down, the next version, the V/A, that is called kerning. We'll learn about that a lot more in typography, but that changes the space between just 2 letter forms. So when your cursor is between the 2 letter forms, it puts more space or less space between those two letters. The next one over is tracking. That's the one we want, the VA that's got the arrows going right and left. That one puts equal spacing between all of the letters, and it makes it wider, or it makes it more pulled together if you use negative numbers. We're going to change this tracking to 100, which is going to, normal is 0. That's just how the type normally looks. So we're going to put some more tracking in it. If any of these other options are still lit up, like mine are from a previous time, I have faux bold turned on here with the bold button because I could use the actual bold that Georgia ships with. This version just fakes it. And then I also have my caps on. I'm going to turn that off. All right. Now that we made this guideline in the exact center, we can click basically on it at the top of our page to set our type here. And once we do that, Lorem Ipsum comes in the font that we chose, the size that we chose, and the tracking that we chose. And we're ready to type and change it out. So we're going to do the word digital in all caps. And the font that I chose, this is too big, so I'm going to double click to select it, and I'm going to just pick a smaller font size so that it actually fits. So if whatever font you chose is a little too big, go ahead and find one that works. Another thing that you can do is, as long as you have the type highlighted on your screen, if it's selected, now when you go to your option bar at the top of the page and you start hovering over all these different fonts, it gives you a preview, which is kind of nice. You used to have to click on it to make it preview. Now you get a live preview of what some of these other fonts would look like. So if the one that you picked doesn't quite fit the mood or doesn't look how you wanted it to look, go ahead and change out to a different one. Switch to that one just for fun. All right, when you're happy with it, either hit Enter on your keyboard or the check mark up at the top to accept your changes. If your type isn't where you want it, grab your Move tool. The type layer is the layer that's highlighted in our Layers panel, therefore that's the one we're going to be moving. And you can just bring it down into the image. All right, we notice in the book, it looks like the word digital is behind her head. So what would we have to do to accomplish that instead of stacked on top of her head?
Move the layer.
Yep, just move the layer down. So when you move it so that it's under in the stacking order, that's how you can change that. So that's pretty common on magazine covers. You see the name of the magazine is kind of behind whatever picture they have. They've tucked it behind there. All right. So whatever, it says that we added these letters in black, mine are white. It really doesn't matter because we're going to end up filling them with a graphic. Anyway, we're going to use them as a clipping mask. So what we first need to do is go get that. So we're going to do a File, Open. We're going to go back into Lesson 7 and we're going to open circuitboard.tiff. TIFF images are Photoshop bitmap raster images that are just saved in a format. TIFF is not compressed, so there's no loss of quality or data, whereas JPEGs are compressed and therefore smaller. So TIFFs are a little bit bigger. So circuit board is what we opened up. So the directions in the book walk you through doing a 2-up view on your window so that you can drag from panel to panel, but we also know how to drag images from one to another. So first thing we're going to do is just unlock this background layer of this circuit board. So just double click on the layer to turn it into a regular layer. And then with your Move tool, we're going to drag it up into the tab of our other project that we're working on. Don't let go of your mouse. Drag your cursor down into the graphic and let go. And that's going to bring it into this graphic. And we see it's added as a new layer called Layer 1. If we want to keep our file clean, we're going to rename that and just call it Circuit Board. When you bring in layers and you're doing this, it's a good idea to name them in a logical way, because if you don't, and you're making a big file like a magazine cover or something like that, all of a sudden you're going to have, 20 to 30 layer 1, layer 2, layer 5, layer 7. It's so much easier to just name them and keep your file clean as you go. All right. Let's select this layer, the circuit board, and we're going to scale it down to be about the size of the words digital. So you can do a Command T once you have that selected, and then we're going to scale it proportionately, which now is the default behavior. In old versions of Photoshop, you always had to hold Shift to keep it proportionate. That actually does the opposite now. So scale it down to be about the size and the width of your words digital, so that it covers those words, and cover up the text completely. All right, there's 2 ways of making this, and then also you have to hit OK or the check mark at the top here to accept that change. So there's 2 ways of making this a clipping mask. It's stacked on top of the type that it's going to ultimately go into, which is perfect. In the past, we held down Option or Alt and hovered between the 2 layers, and we got that downward arrow, we clicked. Another way that you can do it is to right-click on it and choose Create Clipping Mask. Okay. Does the exact same thing as holding Option or Alt and hovering between those 2 layers. Now you can see that since I have it clipped, when I do this, it shows me the no, which would unclip it. So you can use a keyboard shortcut, or you can right-click on the layer and from that pop-up window choose Create Clipping Mask. Pardon? Another thing that you can do, remember, we can move that graphic around behind it, because it's basically just made our type a window. So whatever part of our graphic is showing behind it is what will show through the window. So if you want to reposition it to have a few more details showing up in your Word Digital, go ahead and do that.
I'm doing both methods and it's not.
Do you have your layers stacked correctly? Nope, your thing needs to be on top of your type. Now it'll work. Yep.
All right.
The graphic has to be on top of the shape or type that it's going to show through. All right, select the digital layer, the one called digital, which is our type. And we're going to add a layer style. So we're going to click on that FX or Special Effects button at the bottom of our layers panel. And we're going to choose the inner shadow as our option. And in this pop-up window, we see that inner shadow is highlighted and checked, meaning check means it's turned on, highlighted means whatever options exist for it show up in this middle window. And we're going to change a few things. And again, this is stuff that you just play with. There is no right or wrong numbers. You play with the numbers and you play with the blending mode. Multiply is going to make it darker. And since you want an inner shadow, darker makes sense. Maybe we want more, we want to see it more. The opacity, if you drag it to 100, it's very obvious. If you drag it down, it becomes less and less obvious. We're going to take our opacity to about half, 48, 50%. Distance. As you pull on that slider, you're going to see what it does, how it fills in that inner shadow. We're going to take our distance to about 18 pixels. Choke, again, if you pull right and left for extremes, you see how it behaves. We get a harder edge or a softer edge. We're going to leave that at 0. And size, again, pull it around to see what effect you get, and we're going to take our size to about 16. This is all done visually. Normally there aren't numbers telling you what to do. So you play around with these sliders to get the look that you want, and then say OK. So we've added some type with a clipping mask with a graphic inside the type, and we added a special inner shadow to it to give it a little dimension. Do a file save to save at this point. And the next thing we're going to do is create type on a path, which is easy. And I have to tell you, when I worked through this chapter just to see what was going to go on, I had like 3,000 problems and none of them made sense. It was like on my 3,001st click, it worked. And I did the exact same thing 3,001 times. So just giving you a preface. If it looks like I don't know what I'm doing, I swear I do. And I swear I was having crazy weird problems. So we'll see. Type on a path is a cool thing. All right. In our layers panel, select the model layer. So the layer of the girl's face herself. And then we're going to turn on our paths panel. And to do that, because it's not showing up over here in the right now, we're just going to go up to the window drop down and turn on paths. And here it is. It's a floating path right now. And you can see that there's something called speech path. Click on it to activate it. So you can save paths just like we save selections as alpha channels. They don't print, they don't do anything, but when you click on them, they activate them. So we see this wavy line that the author of this file has already done for us. This is the shape that they want the words to go on, and they've already drawn it out for us. If that were not the case, we would use the pen tool and draw it out ourselves. That's a chapter later or two in the book, but we know it from Illustrator, right? It's the same concept. You click and drag up to get your wave going up. You click and drag down to get your wave going down, and you make that open path with the pen tool in Photoshop just like you would in Illustrator. But again, that's a chapter or two later, so they've already done it for us. And they're showing us that we can save paths like this. All right. We're going to click on our type tool over in the toolbar, and we're going to change our some of our settings. We're going to change it to be right align, which is the far one. That means that wherever we click, that point is anchored down, and our type is going to push off to the left. The right is going to be in alignment. Go over to your character panel on the right, and we're going to change a bunch of these options. We're going to do Myriad Pro Regular. If you're still in a class and you don't want to be, just make sure that you click on that filter to be all classes. And then Myriad Pro. The nice thing is you don't have to scroll and scroll. You can start typing the name of it in this box and it will start to populate. So Myriad Pro Regular. We're going to make sure that the style is regular, which makes sense because that's the one that we just picked. The size is going to be a lot smaller, 14 points. And our tracking, which we currently have set at 100, we're going to bring down to a -10. So that's going to make it tighter. Instead of being the normal of 0, which is however that font is spaced out, we're going to make it a little tighter. In our color, we're going to choose white. So if white is not your choice, go ahead and make it your choice. And we're going to choose the all caps, the big TT, so that however we type it, it's going to come through in all caps. All right. You might want to zoom in a little bit to see this curvy line by her mouth. And then with our type tool, we're going to position it very close to her mouth because remember we've anchored it there and everything is going to push left. And when you hover over that path, our cursor changes into the insertion point with a wavy line through it. When you see that, and wait till you see that wavy line, click once to put your insertion point down. And it should fill with filler text, and lorem ipsum is what we see. We're going to type in what's new with games? Question mark. We want to stylize just the word games, so we're going to click on it or double click to select the word games. A single click puts your insertion point in wherever you click. A double click selects the word that you're on, and a triple click selects the whole line or paragraph. And that works throughout all the Adobe family of things. So select the word games, and from there we're going to change the font style in our character panel to be bold. So instead of being Myriad Pro regular, this one word is going to be bold. Okay, what's new with games?
You know all those issues you said you were having?
Yep. Did you have one? Okay.
I had to this is
Changed. This was supposed to be changed to be right.
I had you.
And then let's try again. Let's take your type tool and wait till you get the curvy line when you're over the.
It's just like the path is
Oh.
disabled.
Say no up here. It's waiting for you to answer that first time. Okay, change that back to right. Yep. Yeah. If you didn't choose this right alignment, when we click by our mouth, the default is usually left, so all the type would want to go to the right, and there is no path to go, so it would have nowhere to go, and it would look like you're failing. If you're doing a centered, it's going to be equally confused, because it can only go one direction. So as long as your insertion point up here is said to be right justified, that should have worked. Okay, got that done. Games bold. Okay, all good. You clicked on the little check mark up here in the option bar or hit enter on your keyboard to make it work. All right. Select in your layers panel the what's new with games layer, the one that we just made. And we're going to duplicate this layer. So you can right click and choose duplicate layer, or you can Command J, that's the shortcut, and keyboard shortcuts are almost always faster. So duplicate that so that it says what's new with games. And we're going to change the name of this layer. We're going to click on the name of it to rename it. Come on. And instead of saying what's new with games, we're going to say what's new with music. That's going to be the name of this layer. It doesn't need to be a copy layer anymore. Okay, we can't see this because it's a duplicate of this. It's stacked exactly on top of this layer, so nothing looks different. We haven't actually changed the word games to music. We've just changed the name of the layer over here in the layers panel. Take your type tool, click on the word games to select it, and now change this to be music. And you can see that we do have another layer on top, and it does now look like a hot mess. So change that word to music, either hit enter or click on the check mark up in the option bar to accept that change. And then with that layer still selected, we're going to do some transforming of this layer. So we're going to do edit, then free transform path, which is about halfway down, Command T, which is free transform. We get our bounding box around it. And we're going to rotate the left side of the path up about 15 degrees. So start turning this until we see 15 degrees in our tooltip. And this is one of the 3.5 million problems. We have our layer selected. Command T. Is your type moving with it?
Nope.
Move it up a little higher and say yes. There we go. I couldn't remember if it did it with it or after the fact. So if you rotate it up 15 degrees and then take your move tool and just move that stack of words up a little higher so that it comes out up a little higher, after you hit OK or the check box, the type will go with the path because it's tied to that path. Oops. So if you need to move that a little bit more, take your move tool and just position it up a little bit. All right, we're going to repeat those steps. So we're going to go back to what's new with games, that layer. We're going to duplicate it, Command J. We're going to rename that duplicate layer, what's new with phones. It's the name of that layer. Then with our type tool, on that new duplicate layer that's stacked on top of the games, we're going to select the word, not you, I'm going to select the word games. We're going to change that to be phones. Then we're going to free transform that, so Command T. We're going to make this one go negative 15 degrees. And then we're going to move it down. And say, okay, what's new with phonies? There we go. So the path was already there. We put type on it, and then to make these 3 different looks, we just duplicated it and then free transformed it a little bit and moved it into position. So do a file save after you get to this point.
Now when I try and type it all the way out to phones, it just cuts the phones out like it's not in the space.
If your type is too big for that line, for whatever reason, it ran out of room literally on that path. It doesn't have anywhere else to go. So a workaround would just be to make that. In real life, you would either make the path longer or you would click on the type and make it a little bit smaller or a little bit tighter to fit on the path that you have. That would be the workaround. Okay, so we have type on this path right now. Right now it's literally on the straight line, so we drew that wavy line and our type followed it exactly. If we want to make it a little bit more unique or do something to it, we're going to use the feature called warping. And warping is where we take something and we put it in the envelope of our shape. So let's just say we have an envelope that's literally shaped like a heart. We shove our words in that envelope and they bend to match that shape. If we have an envelope that's shaped like an arc, where the bottom is flat but the top of it arcs around, and we shove our words in that envelope, they take on that shape. That's like the best way to picture it, where the word envelope comes from. So we're going to do that with our type. Make sure that we can see our words here. And we're going to go to the What's New with Games layer. Let's pick that one. And from here, we're going to right-click on the layer. And we're going to choose warp. Where are you? Warp, warp. Down at the bottom, or halfway down. Warp text. I'm going to click on that. And our warp menu pops up. So move that out of the way where you can see what we're doing. And in the style, I want you to choose something. Go through a bunch of them and see how it behaves. Notice that the shape or the style that you picked, like I said, is basically the shape of the envelope that we're shoving the letters in, and they're therefore behaving according to that. Whatever shape you give it, I'm just going to do arc. No, I'm not, because I can't see that one. Let's do rise. You also can bend them. You can see the bend here, and you can horizontally distort them, so it's like you're twisting them on a 3D line, and you can vertically distort them, like you're taking the ends of the path and screwing around with them. Remember I said if you hold Option and click on the cancel button, it turns into reset, so if you've done a bunch of goofy things, you can always reset back to normal. So the choice that we want to make,
It seems like I might be the only person having issues today.
all right,
Could not complete the request because the type layer has a faux bold style.
okay, it shouldn't have faux bold, so let's see where things went wrong. Say okay. The layer that you're on is this one.
I don't know why
Choose the layer first. Get out of the warp. Okay, what layer are you on? That one, games. Take your type tool and put your insertion point in that layer with the type tool. Click on it so that you're inside it. With the, where's your cursor? Okay. Myriad Pro Bold. You have full, that fake bold turned on. Turn that off. You don't need that. All right, so in this warping option, what we want to do is choose wave from the style. And then we're going to tweak some of these bend parts. Bend of 33%. Again, this would just be whatever you want it to be. You're having fun with it on your own. Horizontal distortion of a negative 23%. And a vertical of a +5. So you can see how it's kind of twisting it around. And then you would say, okay, so however you want this to warp, this is something that visually you would play with, and these are the numbers that the book is giving us. So we'll say, okay, and instead of being just flat type on a line, it looks a little bit more animated. Choose the words, what's new with phones, and we're going to do that same thing to it. So right click on that layer, choose warp text, we're going to choose wave, and then again about the same numbers. So 33% for bend, horizontal of negative 23, and vertical of 5. And then do that with that last layer, what's new with music. Right click, warp text, wave, 33%, negative 23-ish, and +5-ish. Mine are not exactly the same. I just kind of dragged the slider around. And we have all three of them bent. And then when you're done with that, save your work. File, save. Go back to showing my whole page, and now we have type on a path coming out from her mouth. Okay, all the type that we've done so far has been done with point type, where we just click. The insertion point is wherever we click, and depending on where we have our justification or alignment set up, it either is right aligned, left aligned, or center aligned based on where we click. The other way, like I said, is doing paragraph type, where you actually drag out a box and your type fits inside of that. And if you have more type that fits inside of that, it overflows and you have to make either a bigger box or make your type smaller. Somehow you have to make it fit. All right. We're going to add some more guidelines first so we can position some things a little bit more perfectly. Make sure you can see the top half of your screen. I'm going to pull this down and over like that. I'm going to close my paths window because we're done with that. From our left ruler, we're going to drag one out that comes 1/4 of an inch from the far right. So this is an 8.5 sheet of paper. We're going to come back 1/4 inch. So at 8 1/4 approximately is where we're going to drop that guide. And then we're going to bring one down from the top ruler down to our 2-inch mark. So we're going to bring another guide down to here. This can be helpful when you're trying to figure out where to position certain elements and you want to bring down guides to kind of make boxes for yourself. All right, we're ready to add text to this. I'm going to show my whole screen again. And normally, if you're getting information from somebody else, from a client, they might have written up everything they want on the cover of their magazine. So they might send it to you in a Word document, or they might send it to you in an email or something where you have to copy and paste it rather than retype it out. Pluses and minuses. What if they had a typo and you just blindly copy it all in? You got to be careful. You have to proofread. Just because you're a graphic designer and somebody gave you all the information does not mean that you don't have to pay attention to grammar and typos and things like that. Okay, that is important. The other thing is, if you type it all in yourself, you run the risk of making the typo. So probably taking what they give you, running it through spell check, and then actually visually looking at it yourself, because we all know that there are words that don't show up on spell check because they are words, but they're wrong. Or some other weird thing where maybe somebody's first name, it autocorrects into, you know, Wood instead of Woody. His name was Woody, and all of a sudden it says Wood because it auto-corrected. So you have to check these things. A cool feature that they've added to this file that I've honestly never used, because in my life I've never had anybody give me a Photoshop file to start with and that had text in it. The sticky note, do you guys see this little note thing hanging out down here at the bottom right? That's what the person who made this file sent along with the type that they want in it. This doesn't happen very often, but maybe when you're working with partners, you might want to do this. I literally have never used it in 25 years of using Photoshop, but hey, it exists, so let's look at it. This is a sticky note. They gave us what we need. Take your Move tool, make sure you're using that one, and come down to the sticky note down here and double click on it. And it popped up a little window called Notes. And when we look, here's the type that they typed up for us. The trend issue, what's hot, yada, yada, yada. And they have it all spaced how they want it, evidently, line by line. So it's not like it's one long sentence and we have to figure out how they want it spaced out. This is all ready to go. So in here, select it all. The blue highlight will select it and do a Command-C to copy. And then we can close the note panel. We're done with that. That type has now been copied into our cursor. You can see that the cursor is loaded with type. Select the model layer. Make sure that we're working on the model layer before we go ahead and do anything else. And then we're going to go and grab our type tool in the toolbar, bring our cursor over, and we are not going to just click because that would be an insertion point. We're going to click and drag. So we're going to start, this is weird, but we're starting at this top right intersection point that we made, like below the letter L. We're going to start here and we're going to drag down and to the left. And we're going to make our box approximately 4 inches wide by 8 inches tall. So coming over to that guideline, we'll make it 4 inches wide and then drag down until you see your tooltip say that you're at about 8 inches tall. Again, the book knows what they want. In real life, you'd be dragging this out visually and say, yep, that's where I want my type to go. And then when you let go, because you have the type tool loaded with all that type that you copied, it should populate in that box with lorem ipsum crap. Now we need to change it out to what we got from the note. So we need to do a Command-V to paste. And what pasted in is exactly those words spaced out on the lines that they had them on. And it comes in the style that we last had set up in our character panel. So mine came in Myriad Pro Bold, 14-point, negative tracking, and all caps. That's by default how it came in. All right. Let's, with our type tools, select these first 3 words, the trend issue. And in our character panel, we're going to stylize those a little bit differently. We're going to do Myriad Pro, regular, so change that to be regular. We're going to make this 70-point type, 70. The leading, instead of being auto, we're going to tell it how we want it to be, and we're going to make this 55, which is smaller than the type itself, so it's going to be a pretty tight leading. You can see normally your leading for paragraphs of type that you have to read is 1.5 the size of the type. So if your type is 10-point, 1.5 as big as 15. So there's 15 points of space between 10-point type. That's what's good to read. By making it smaller than the 70 that the type is, we put it pretty tight together. And it's kind of a stylistic thing. Tracking, we're going to switch from -10 to be 50. The alignment on here, we're going to have be right, which it still is. And color is white. So all that's good, and we can say OK. And we just stylize those 3 words a little bit differently. We're now just going to stylize the word trend. So click twice, once for your insertion point, twice gives you the word. And we're going to change this one word to be bold. So do it in the actual character family, not a fake bold. So Myriad Pro bold. Again, if you do it down here in all these rows of T's, that's faux bold, fake bold. And we don't want that when the real version of that type has a bold version. All right. A few steps later, we're going to come back and make this green, so we might as well do it right now, the word trend. So click on the color block inside your character tab and find a green that you like, or sample one out of something else like the background of the word digital. That way you know it's going to match and look nice. To do that, you just, when this color picker comes up, just move your cursor over your document, and whatever it's hovering over, it'll sample that color. All right, the rest of the type, let's grab that. So what's hot all the way down to the bottom is going to be Myriad Pro Regular, 22 point, leading of 28. So instead of being auto, we're going to tell it what to be, 28. Tracking 0 means that no tracking, it's just as the font is intended to be. And we're going to turn off the all caps. So when we did that, notice that some words or some lines went back to mixed and others stayed capital. However, the person originally typed them in is how they look now. So when we put on that fake all caps, it turned everything all caps. Some of it already was. When we turned off the fake all caps, things went back to how they were originally typed in. All right, select the words what's hot. We're going to turn that into being bold. So in your character panel, change it to bold. And we're also going to make it be a little bit bigger, not 22, but 28 points. And then we're going to do the same for what's not. So highlight what's not, make it bold, and make it 28 point. And then either hit enter on your keyboard or the check mark at the top to commit to all the changes that you've made. And we're going to save our file. All right, everybody good so far? Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a shape up here by the letter L inside that guideline that we made. We're going to make a shape coming down, and we're going to end up putting the words volume 1 inside that shape. So the first thing we have to do is add a rounded rectangle. In our tools panel, we need to take the rounded rectangle. Now please note, it is not the marching ants. It's not the third tool down, the marquee tool. It is also not the gradient tool, which looks like a rectangle right above our type tool. It's not that one. Keep going down, and eventually we're going to see rectangle tool, rounded rectangle tool, ellipse tool, shape tool. So we want the rounded rectangle tool. Click on that tool, bring your cursor over, and we're going to be working up by the letter L. So if you want to change your zoom a little bit, we're going to be working up in this area with our rounded rectangle tool. And we're going to click and drag out a rounded rectangle that starts up at the top of our document and comes down above the letter L. And when we let go of that, over in our properties panel, we see some details about it. So over here in the properties panel, we're going to change the width of this. No matter what you drew it to be, we're going to change it to be 67. And then if you hit tab, it just goes on to another box within this, another window that we can change, another detail that we can change. The fill color we're going to change, so click on the fill color below that, and we're going to see all the swatches that come up. And from here, we're going to do the pastel yellow orange swatch in the third row. So hover over them, and eventually you get a tooltip. Pastel red orange. Yellow orange is the one we want. Good grief. So it's the third one in that third row of the yellows. Click to fill it with that color. And then by default, when we make a rounded rectangle, all 4 corners are rounded equally, so you can see that they all have the same rounding. So in our properties panel, feel like this is covering up something. Okay, there it is. If your swatch colors were covering up and you couldn't see anything else, click away to get those to disappear so that we can then see more details at the bottom of this window. We see 10 pixel, 10 pixel, 10 pixel, 10 pixel. That means that all 4 corners are 10 pixel rounded, and this link button in the middle that's turned on makes that the case. Once you type in 10 for one, they're all going to be the same. So we're going to click that to unlink them. We're going to change the left corner to be 16 pixels, and the rest of them we're going to change to be zeros. So using your tab, you can work through them all. So that made hard corners on 3 sides and a rounded corner of 16 pixels on the left. And then take your move tool if you need to and move it so that it hangs down from the top of your document and that it's flushed up to that guideline that you have. And looks something like that. And then when you're happy with it, you can if you need to click that check mark up in the option bar saying, yes, I'm happy with these changes, go ahead and do that. I've already gotten past that, obviously. All right, now we want to put type in this little ribbon. And in our type tool, we have some nested tools. So if you hold down on the type tool, you see that in addition to horizontal, which is the normal, we also have vertical type. So click on that to select the vertical type. Actually, before we do that, we need to deselect all of our layers because I still have this layer highlighted. So up in your select menu, there's no keyboard shortcut for this. You have to go to select and then deselect layers. That way, absolutely nothing in your layer panel is highlighted or turned on. You're not targeting any of it. Then we can go and take our vertical type tool. Make sure that you have that one set up. All right. We're going to hold down the Shift key and we're going to click inside this rectangle that we just made. And we can see that that puts in type. And we can look at our alignment boxes up in the option bar. They look a little bit different now that we're working with vertical type, but our lorem ipsum moved in here. We're going to type in VOL1, volume 1. And then obviously it's too big, so we're going to click to select it all. And we're going to come to our character panel and we're going to change it. We're going to, instead of having a bold style, we're going to go with regular. We're going to make it a lot smaller, 14. They actually even want us to go with a sans serif type, which Myriad Pro works. There's no feet on this one. 14 point tracking was 28. That's way too much. We're going to change that to 10. And they want us to make this black. So instead of the color of white, we click on the color box, and then pure black is the lower left corner down here in your color wheel. Make sure that you see RGB values of 0. That means there's no red, no green, no blue light. It's black. Notice that the CMYK, if this were to go to print, it would make it what they call a rich black. It would mix cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink at these percentages to create this muddy, inky black. If you wanted this to print in commercial ink space with just black ink, you would actually change that to be 0, 0, 0, 100. That's true black in a CMYK. It's not in the book, I just happened to notice it here. So rich black is when a bunch of inks combine to kind of make this muddy black. True black in a CMYK workspace looks like this. So however you do it, it doesn't matter. This file is still RGB. We can see that up in the tab. We're working on it on our computer right now. Ultimately, though, if this is a magazine cover, it would be printed CMYK with ink, not with light. RGB is light. So this would be a good thing to do. So we now have volume 1 in black, and commit to your type changes with the little check mark. And we're good. We're just going to clean up our file a little bit. Make sure you can see your whole document. And we have that note down here at the bottom yet. Remember that? So we're going to take our Move tool and we're going to come down to our note here to select it. And we're going to control click on a Mac or right click if you have the right click enabled. And we're going to delete the note. It's going to take it away from here. And it says, do you want to delete this note? Yes, I do. Now that little icon is gone and we don't have that note going around with it. To hide the guides temporarily, so we don't have to see them, we wouldn't want to have to pull them all back into the rulers to just view it a certain way. The keyboard shortcut to hide your guidelines is Command semicolon. Double check that. Yep, Command semicolon. That's a toggle. We'll turn them on and off. So a lot of times you have a lot of guides when you're working, but you want to see it clean. That's a quick toggle to turn those guides on and off. All right, let's do a file save. And there is our PSD file. That's the one that you would always and forever want to keep because that's your actual editable file. If this were something that you were sending off to a printer, however, you would want to send them a flattened file. So to do that, we're going to save a copy first. So we'll do a file, save as, and we'll call this flattened. And instead of a PSD, from the format, we're going to choose TIFF. Way down here. You could choose JPEG, you could choose a PDF file. We're going to choose a TIFF. And I want you to note a couple of things. TIFFs can keep layers. They can act just like a PSD, but if we're sending this to a commercial printer, we don't want that. We want it to be a flattened file. So we're going to turn off the layers thing here. And it says it's going to save it as a copy because it's worried that you don't know what you're doing, that you're turning off layers, and you say save. And then when this comes up, the TIFF options, unless you have a reason to change them specific from the printer or you know something else, leave it alone, say OK. We're back to just having our PSD in front of us, but if we do a file open, in our file we should see the flattened version. And note that my flattened TIFF is 10 megs, whereas my PSD file is 27. So if we open that flattened TIFF that we just made, notice it's just one layer, it's one thing. This is what you would send. Again, this isn't in the book, but if this were going to a commercial printer, we would change this to CMYK, to ink workspace. So let's just do that for kicks. Image, mode, and then we're going to choose CMYK. And it's going to warn us. Are you sure you want to do this? Things might look different, yada yada. We say okay. And was there a shift? Did you see any change? Maybe, maybe not. But remember, I don't know how much I've talked about it yet or Mary has in Design Fundamentals, but everything we see on a computer screen can't necessarily be reproduced with inks. There's some limitations. Do you remember that really bright neon-y purple flower I showed you a while ago and we switched from RGB to CMYK and we saw it get real dull? There's just not an ink that will replicate that. So the last thing you do is change to CMYK, and if you see any color issues, you can then work with them from here. But this looks good. This can go to a commercial printer now. After we do that, remember to save because it doesn't know that we've done this yet. So File, Save. And now we have a flattened TIFF file in CMYK format that we could send off to a printer. They wouldn't need the fonts because it doesn't exist as fonts. This is one flattened image now. It's not editable. They can't, if there's a typo, if we put what's hot with 2 T's and we just said, oh, just fix it, they can't when we send them this version, right? We have to go back to the PSD, fix the type layer, and send them the correction. Okay? All right,